The Galactic Council chamber was the largest room Bake Juno had ever seen. It stretched wide, like the inside of a cathedral, with seats carved into rising walls of pale stone that glowed faintly blue. Hundreds of species sat in those seats. Some had scales, some had wings, some were so large they needed 3 chairs, and some were so small they floated in gravity bubbles just to be seen. Juno sat at the very bottom row, in the corner, in a seat that was slightly too big for him. The seat assigned to Earth, the seat nobody cared about. He adjusted his tie and smiled politely at a delegate from the Maran species who passed by without looking at him. That was fine. He was used to it. 40 years ago, Earth had joined the Galactic Council. Humanity had arrived with open hands, offering friendship, trade, and cooperation. The galaxy had responded with a shrug. Humans were small, their lives were short, their technology was average at best. They had no empire, no colonies beyond their own solar system, and no military worth mentioning. In the rankings of galactic power, Earth sat somewhere near the bottom, right between a species of intelligent fungi and a planet of singing worms. Juno did not mind the low seat. In fact, he preferred it. From down here, he could see everyone. Today the council had gathered to hear a request from the Kelhari Dominion. The Kelhari were the galaxy's biggest fist. They were tall, broad, armored in natural bone plates, and they had conquered more systems than most species could name. Their warlord emperor, a massive creature called Dren, stood at the center of the chamber like he owned it. And in many ways, he did. Dren's voice filled the room like thunder. He was demanding expansion rights into 3 unclaimed star systems near the outer rim. His reasons were thin, something about security concerns and natural borders. The Kelhari wanted more territory, because the Kelhari always wanted more territory, and nobody was going to stop them. The High Speaker of the Council, an ancient being named Vorik, listened with tired eyes. He had seen this before, many times. He asked the required questions, he noted the required objections, and then, as always, the council voted to approve the expansion. Because saying no to the Kelhari meant war, and nobody wanted war with the Kelhari. Juno wrote something in his notebook. He had been writing in that notebook for years. Names, alliances, voting patterns, who feared whom, who owed what. The other delegates thought he was doodling. He let them think that. After the session ended, Dren walked through the corridor with his admiral, a sharp-eyed Kelhari named Pelan. They passed Juno without slowing down. "Did you see the human?" Dren said, his voice low, but not low enough. "They send one man with a notebook to a council of empires. No soldiers, just a smiling little creature in a suit." Pelan made a sound like grinding rocks, which was the Kelhari version of laughter. "Their entire military is maybe 40 ships. Old designs, barely enough to patrol their own system. They are not even worth conquering." "Not yet," Dren said, "but their system has resources, good metals, a gas giant worth mining. When we finish with the outer rim, perhaps we will pay them a visit." They walked on. Juno stood still in the corridor, his notebook closed, his smile unchanged. Far away, on a planet covered in blue oceans and green land, Admiral Kang Doha sat in a room buried deep beneath a mountain. The room had no windows, it had screens instead, and every screen showed something different. Fleet positions, weapons tests, intelligence reports. Doha was a man who looked like he had been carved from stone and then taught to be patient. His hair was gray. His hands never shook. Captain Yoon Nari stood across from him, arms folded. She was younger, sharper, and had the kind of face that made people nervous even when she was smiling. Next to her sat Shin Hana, the lead scientist of Earth's Weapons Research Division. Hana was small, quiet, and had the habit of staring at things like she was taking them apart in her mind. "The Kelhari surveyed our outer boundary again," Doha said. "Third time this year. They're getting closer. Nari's jaw tightened. How long do we have? Months, maybe a year. Dren is busy with the outer rim, but once he finishes, he will look inward, and we are a tempting target. Hana pulled up a hologram. It showed a map of the solar system, but this map was different from the one the galaxy knew. The public records showed Earth with 40 combat ships and a handful of defense stations. This map showed something else entirely. Hidden inside hollowed-out asteroids, beneath the surface of moons, tucked into the dark spaces between planets, there were shipyards. Hundreds of them. And in those shipyards, there were ships. Not 40, not 100. Over 800 warships, built in secret over the last 3 decades. Each one carried weapons designed by Hana's team, systems that had been reverse-engineered from every piece of alien technology Earth had ever traded for, and then improved far beyond their original design. Phase 1 is complete, Hana said. The fleet is ready. The mines are deployed across the outer system. The shield disruption resonance charges are tested and working. Doha nodded slowly. Good. Nari looked at the map for a long moment. We spent 40 years pretending to be weak. We spent 40 years making sure that if anyone ever came for us, they would regret it. There is a difference. On the station of Aethys Prime, as delegates filed out of the council chamber, a Miran observer named Sula stood near a window overlooking the stars. She had watched the session in silence, as she always did. The Miran were not fighters. They were watchers. They studied. They remembered. And Sula had been watching the human delegate for a long time. She had noticed something that no one else had. Every other minor species in the council carried themselves with some mix of fear, nervousness, or eagerness to please. They laughed too quickly at jokes made by stronger species. They agreed too fast. They made themselves small. The human did none of those things. He was polite. He was quiet. But he was not afraid. There was something in his eyes that Sula recognized from old records, from species that had survived extinction events and come out the other side harder than before. The dangerous kind. She watched Juno disappear down the corridor and thought to herself, that one is not hiding because he is weak. He is hiding because he is waiting. 3 months passed, and the excuse came exactly as Doa had predicted. A minor trade clause, something about shipping lane registrations that nobody had ever enforced, was suddenly declared a violation by the Kalahari Dominion. Dren called it an act of economic aggression. He called it dangerous and destabilizing. He called it a threat to galactic order. Everyone knew it was a lie. Nobody on the council objected. The order was simple. Admiral Pilan would take 300 warships to the Sol system, deliver a subjugation demand, and bring the humans to heel. Dren did not even attend the briefing. He was busy with other matters. Earth was not important enough for his full attention. Pilan assembled the fleet at the edge of Kalahari space. 300 ships, heavy cruisers, destroyers, troop carriers, and his own flagship, a massive vessel called the Fist of Dominion. By any standard, it was an overwhelming force for a species with 40 known combat ships. Pilan considered it overkill, but he was a careful officer. Better to crush quickly than to give the enemy time to beg for help. The fleet jumped through faster-than-light space and arrived at the edge of the Sol system, just beyond the orbit of the farthest planet. Pilan stood on his bridge, looking at the star called Sol, a small yellow dot surrounded by spinning rocks and gas. Unremarkable, boring, easy. He opened a communication channel and broadcast the standard subjugation demand. Surrender your government. Disband your military. Accept Kalahari governance. Resistance will result in destruction. The response came after 30 seconds of silence. It was a single voice, calm and flat, like a man reading the weather report. It was Admiral Kang Doha. You are not welcome here. Leave now. This is your only warning. Pilon stared at the speaker for a moment, then made the grinding sound of Kalahari laughter. His officers joined in. One warning. From a species with 40 ships, and was almost cute. He ordered the fleet forward. 300 warships moved inward, past the orbit of Neptune, heading toward the heart of the system. The first mine detonated against the hull of a heavy cruiser on the left flank. It did not explode in the traditional sense. There was a pulse, a deep vibration that passed through the ship like a wave through water. Every shield generator on the cruiser overloaded and died at the same time. The ship went dark. Then 1,000 more mines activated. They were everywhere. Hidden in asteroid debris, drifting in the void between planets, disguised as dead rocks. Each one carried the same resonance charge that Shin Hana's team had spent years perfecting. They did not destroy ships. They stripped them naked, killing shields and leaving hulls exposed and vulnerable. In the first 90 seconds, 62 Kalahari warships lost their protective barriers completely. Pilon shouted orders. Pull back, regroup, activate countermeasures. But before his fleet could reorganize, the second surprise arrived. They came from everywhere. From inside asteroids that split open like eggs. From beneath the surface of moons. From hidden docks scattered across the system that no scanner had ever detected. Ships, human ships. Not 40, not 100. 812 warships poured into the battle space, and they were nothing like what the galaxy had seen before. They were fast, sharp, and built with a strange mix of technologies that Pilon's officers could not identify. Human engineering fused with borrowed alien systems, improved and twisted into something new. Captain Yoon Nari sat in the command chair of the Iron Crane, the lead ship of the Vanguard fleet. Her eyes moved across the tactical display like a hawk watching mice in a field. She gave her first order without raising her voice. Wolf pack formation. Target their engines first. I want them slow before I want them dead. The human fleet moved like a single living thing. Groups of 5 to 8 ships locked together in tight formations, diving into the Kalahari lines with terrifying coordination. They did not fight the way other species fought. There were no grand charges, no dramatic broadsides, no shows of honor. They hit weak points. They struck damaged ships. They cut engines, disabled weapons, and moved on to the next target before the enemy could respond. Pilon watched his fleet come apart. He had trained for wars against species that fought in predictable patterns, species that announced their attacks and followed established rules of engagement. They fought like they had something to protect, something behind them that they would die before letting anyone touch. On the lower decks of the Fist of Dominion, alarms screamed. The hull shook, and then the boarding pods hit. Commander Cho Tae-sung was the first through the breach. He was a large man by human standards, though still smaller than any Kalahari warrior. He wore a powered exosuit that multiplied his strength and speed by a factor of 10. Behind him came 50 Marines, each one trained for exactly this kind of close-quarters nightmare. The Kalahari warriors met them in the corridors. They were big, strong, and covered in natural bone armor. In any fair fight, a Kalahari should have crushed a human. But this was not a fair fight. Tae-sung's Marines moved in pairs, covering angles, using the tight corridors to neutralize the Kalahari size advantage. Their weapons punched through bone plating. Their suits absorbed hits that should have killed them. They fought with a speed and fury that the Kalahari had never faced. Tae-sung reached the bridge in 11 minutes. Pilon was standing when the door blew open. The great admiral, who had conquered 6 systems and never lost a battle, looked at the human standing in the wreckage of his door and saw something in those eyes that chilled his blood. "Admiral Pilon," Tae-sung said, breathing hard but steady, "you are now a prisoner of Earth. Please do not make this more difficult than it needs to be." Pilon surrendered. There was nothing else to do. The battle lasted 47 minutes in total, Of the 300 Kalahari ships, 200 were destroyed or disabled. The survivors ran, jumping to faster-than-light speed the moment they cleared the minefields. Human losses were 11 ships, with most crews recovered. On one of the fleeing ships, a young Kalahari officer named Tobin sat in his quarters and stared at the battle data on his screen. The numbers did not make sense. The tactics did not match anything in the training manuals. The species that the entire galaxy had dismissed as weak and soft had just torn through a Kalahari war fleet like it was made of paper. He played back the recording of Doha's warning, that calm, flat voice. "You are not welcome here. Leave now. This is your only warning." The human had not been bluffing. He had not been desperate. He had been giving them a genuine chance to walk away, and they had laughed. Tobin closed the screen and whispered to the empty room, "What are they?" Far away, in the throne room of the Kalahari homeworld, Warlord Emperor Dren received the report. He read it once, then again, then a third time, because the words refused to make sense. 300 ships, defeated by a species he had called poets and doctors. His greatest admiral captured by creatures half his size. It started small and spread outward, wrapping around his hearts like ice. He had felt anger before. He had felt rage and pride and hunger for conquest, but this feeling was new. It took him a long moment to recognize it, because he had never experienced it before in his long and violent life. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Every network, every station, every species with a receiver heard the same impossible story. The Kalahari Dominion, the greatest military power in known space, had sent 300 warships to conquer Earth, and Earth had broken them in less than an hour. Nobody believed it at first. There were jokes on the communication networks. Surely the reports were wrong. Surely the numbers were exaggerated. The humans, the quiet little species with the notebooks and the trade agreements and the polite smiles, that was impossible. That was like hearing that a house cat had killed a dragon. But then the footage arrived. Ship cameras from fleeing Kalahari vessels showed everything. The mines, the hidden fleet, the wolf pack attacks, the boarding actions, and that calm voice on the open channel, giving one warning before unleashing something the galaxy had never seen. The footage was played and replayed 1,000,000 times in a single day. By the end of that day, nobody was laughing anymore. The Galactic Council called an emergency session on Aethys Prime. Every delegate was present. Every seat was full. The chamber, which usually hummed with casual conversation and political maneuvering, was tight with tension. Species that had ignored each other for centuries were whispering together. Everyone had the same question. How did the humans hide this? And more importantly, what else were they hiding? High Speaker Vorik opened the session with a grave voice. He stated the facts as they were known. The Kalahari Dominion had launched an unprovoked invasion of Earth. Earth had defended itself. The Kalahari fleet had been decisively defeated. He paused after that last word, as if even he could not quite believe he was saying it. The small, ignorable creature from the bottom row seat was suddenly the most important person in the room. Juno set his notebook on the podium. He looked up at the rows of delegates rising above him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Thank you, High Speaker. I will be brief." He paused, letting the silence settle. 40 years ago, humanity came to this council. We came with open hands. We offered trade, friendship, and cooperation. We asked for nothing except to be part of this community. And for 40 years, we have sat quietly in that seat over there. He gestured to the bottom corner, and we have watched. Another pause. His eyes moved slowly across the chamber. We watched as the Kalahari expanded into system after system. We watched as smaller species were absorbed or destroyed. We watched as this council approved every act of aggression, because it was easier to say yes than to say no. And we said nothing, because we were new here, and we thought perhaps this was simply how things worked. The Kelhari diplomat opened his mouth. Juno continued without looking at him. 3 months ago, the Kelhari Dominion invaded our home, our system, our planet, the place where our children sleep. And when we looked to this council for help, for even a single word of objection, we found silence. Not one species spoke for us, not one. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the station systems could be heard through the walls. So let me clarify something about humanity. We did not hide our strength because we were afraid. We hid it because we hoped, truly and desperately hoped, that we would never need to use it. We joined this council believing that cooperation was better than conquest. We still believe that. But we are not fools. He opened his notebook and held it up. Names, alliances, fleet compositions, trade dependencies, political weaknesses. For 40 years, I have studied every species in this chamber. Your weapons, your tactics, your supply lines, your internal politics. I know which of you are strong, and which of you only appear strong. I know which alliances would hold under pressure, and which would crumble in a day. He closed the notebook. We did not do this because we wanted to conquer anyone. We did it because we wanted to know how to survive. Because from the moment we stepped into this galaxy, we understood one simple truth. Nobody was going to protect us. So we learned to protect ourselves. He set the notebook down and placed both hands flat on the podium. Earth does not want war. We never have. But if war comes to our home, if anyone threatens our people, our families, our world, we will end it, quickly, completely, and without apology. The silence that followed lasted a long time. Then, Vorik, the High Speaker, leaned forward in his chair. His ancient eyes studied the human with an expression that mixed respect with something close to dread. Envoy Juno, how long has Earth been capable of this level of military force? Juno met his gaze evenly. Since before we joined the council. The chamber erupted, not in anger this time, but in shock. The realization moved through the delegates like a cold wind. Earth had walked into this council 40 years ago, already capable of being a major power. They had chosen, deliberately and patiently, to sit in the lowest seat and say nothing. They had watched and waited and prepared, while the galaxy treated them like furniture. In the back of the chamber, Sula, the Moran observer, stood and spoke. It was the first time anyone could remember her speaking in a council session. Her voice was soft, but carried clearly. I have spent the past year studying human cultural records. Their history, their literature, their patterns. They have a concept that I think this council needs to understand. In their culture there is a saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. Humans learned long ago that showing strength too early makes you a target. So they hid. They made themselves small. They smiled and nodded and let you believe they were harmless. And now you understand why they were right to do so. Because the moment they showed what they truly were, the first thing this council discussed was whether to attack them. The silence that followed Sula's words was the heaviest yet. Several delegates looked away, unable to meet her gaze. She was right, and everyone knew it. Far from the council chamber, on the Kelhari homeworld, Dren watched the session through a secure feed. His claws dug into the arms of his throne. The human speech burned in his ears, not because it was threatening, because the human had spoken about destroying a Kelhari fleet the way someone might describe closing a door. Dren began making calls, to allied species, to old partners in conquest, to anyone who feared what a hidden human superpower might mean for the balance of the galaxy. His message was simple. Earth had deceived everyone. Earth was dangerous. Earth needed to be destroyed before it destroyed them. On the station, as the session ended, Juno walked back to his quarters. His hands were steady. His face was calm. But when the door closed behind him, he leaned against the wall and let out a long, slow breath. He had just shown the galaxy what Earth really was. There was no going back. His communicator buzzed. It was Shin Hana, calling from the research division on Earth. "They will come back," Hana said. "All of them. Everything they have." "I know," Juno said. "Are we ready?" Juno thought about the hidden shipyards, the orbital platforms, the weapons that Hana's team had been building for years. He thought about Doha's quiet certainty, and Nari's sharp eyes, and Taesung's steady hands. "We are ready," he said. "We have always been ready. That is the whole point." Dren moved fast. Within 6 weeks, he had assembled the largest military coalition the galaxy had seen in a century. 4 species joined the Kalhari, each one motivated by a different shade of the same fear. The humans had lied. The humans were dangerous. If Earth was not stopped now, while its strength was still partially unknown, it might become unstoppable. 5,000 warships gathered at a staging point, 2 systems away from Sol. Heavy battleships, carrier groups, bomber wings, and troop transports stretched across the void in a formation so large it could be seen on long-range sensors from a dozen systems away. Dren stood on the bridge of his new flagship and addressed the coalition through an open channel. His voice was loud, confident, and full of the old fire that had built his empire. "The humans are deceivers. They smiled at us while sharpening their knives. They hid in their little corner of space and built weapons to threaten us all. Today, we end that threat. Today, we remind the galaxy that strength is not something you hide. It is something you use." The coalition cheered. 5,000 ships prepared to jump. On Earth, there was no panic. That was the thing that confused the galactic observers who were monitoring the situation from safe distances. The humans did not evacuate. They did not beg for allies. Schools remained open. Markets continued to operate. People went to work, ate dinner with their families, and watched the news with the same calm attention they gave to weather reports. Admiral Kang Doha appeared on every screen on the planet. He stood in a simple room with a plain background and spoke in the same steady voice he always used. "A large fleet is coming toward our system. This is not unexpected. We have been preparing for this possibility for a very long time. I want you to continue your lives. Trust your neighbors. Trust your fleet. Trust the people who have spent decades making sure this day would never be a surprise. We will be fine." He ended the broadcast. Nari, standing beside him, raised an eyebrow. "We will be fine? That is your inspiring speech?" "I do not need to inspire them," Doha said. "I need them to trust us." And they do. He turned to a holographic display showing the full extent of Earth's true defensive network. What the Kalhari had faced in the first battle was Phase 1, the fleet and the mines. What waited now was Phase 2. And Phase 2 was something else entirely. Orbital defense platforms ringed the solar system at key positions. Each one carried enough firepower to crack a small moon. They were powered by reactors that Hana's team had designed to run for decades without maintenance. Between the platforms, a web of FTL disruption generators created zones where faster-than-light travel was impossible. Any fleet that entered the Sol system would be forced to travel at normal speed, slow and exposed, through killing fields designed by people who had spent 30 years thinking about exactly this scenario. And then there were the ghost ships. Thousands of unmanned vessels, small, fast, and controlled by artificial intelligence systems that thought faster than any living pilot. They had one purpose: swarm the enemy, overwhelm their point defense systems, and create chaos. They were not designed to survive. They were designed to buy time. But Hana's true masterpiece sat at the center of the defense network, hidden inside a station disguised as a mining platform. A gravity well projector, a device that could warp local spacetime, creating crushing gravitational forces in a targeted area. It had never been tested at full power against a live fleet. Today would be the first time. The Coalition fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system and immediately hit the FTL disruption net. 5,000 ships, traveling at faster than light speed, were suddenly yanked back into normal space. The shock alone caused collisions. 18 ships were destroyed in the first 10 seconds, crashing into each other as their navigation systems screamed errors. Before the Coalition could regroup, the ghost ships launched. They came from everywhere, thousands of small, fast, suicidal drones pouring out of hidden stations and asteroid bases. They hit the Coalition fleet like a swarm of angry insects, targeting sensors, weapons arrays, and shield generators. Point defense systems fired desperately, filling space with light, but there were too many. For every ghost ship destroyed, 3 more took its place. In the chaos, the human fleet emerged. 800 warships, plus 200 new vessels that had been completed in the weeks since the first battle. Captain Yoon Nari, now commanding from the bridge of the Iron Crane, had studied every piece of data from the first engagement. She knew the Kelhari tactics. She knew the tactics of every allied species in the Coalition, and she had designed counter-strategies for each one. Split the formation, she ordered. Wolf packs to the flanks, hammer group through the center. I want their command ships isolated in 4 minutes. Her hands moved across the tactical display with practiced precision. But beneath the console, where no one could see, her left hand trembled slightly. She was not a machine. She was a woman who knew that thousands of lives depended on the decisions she made in the next hour. She was terrified. She gave orders anyway. That was the human way. Feel the fear, do it anyway. The battle unfolded across the entire solar system. Coalition forces tried to regroup, but the combination of ghost ship swarms and wolf pack attacks shattered every formation they attempted. The orbital platforms fired from fixed positions, their heavy weapons cutting through capital ships like light through glass. The Coalition had numbers. The humans had preparation, position, and 30 years of planning. Commander Cho Tae-sung led the ground defense on Mars and Luna. Kelhari drop troops had managed to break through the orbital battle in troop carriers, landing on both surfaces. Tae-sung's Marines met them in the tunnels and domes of the human colonies. The fighting was brutal, close, and personal. Tae-sung fought at the front, his exosuit dented and scorched, his voice hoarse from shouting commands. The Kelhari soldiers were brave, but they were fighting in human territory, in corridors designed by humans, against soldiers who knew every corner and shadow. In the orbital battle, a young Kelhari officer named Tobin watched his sensors and saw something that changed him. A disabled human medical ship drifted between the fleets, its hull torn open, its lights flickering. His commanding officer ordered him to fire on it. Tobin looked at the ship. He could see through the breach in the hull. There were people inside, medics, patients. Someone was trying to seal the breach with emergency foam. They were not soldiers. They were not a threat. They were just people trying to survive. No, Tobin said. His commander turned, eyes wide with rage. That is an order. Tobin pulled his sidearm and stunned the commander. Then he opened a channel to the nearest human ship and surrendered. When he was brought aboard, shaking and uncertain, he faced Captain Nari through a screen. Not all of us wanted this, he said. Some of us just did not know how to say no until now. Nari studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Welcome aboard. At the center of the battle, Hana's gravity well projector activated. There was no dramatic countdown, no warning shot. One moment, a section of the Coalition fleet was trying to form a defensive line. The next moment, space-time bent, Ships that weighed millions of tons were pulled together like leaves in a drain. Hulls crumpled, reactors burst. In 8 seconds, 400 coalition ships ceased to exist. The coalition broke. Ships began fleeing in every direction, jumping to FTL the moment they cleared the disruption zones. The Allied species transmitted surrender signals. The Great Armada dissolved into a scattered, panicked retreat. Dren's flagship was cornered by a ring of human warships. His shields were failing. His weapons were damaged. His allies had abandoned him. Admiral Doha's voice came through the communication channel, calm as always. Warlord Emperor, you came to our home with 5,000 ships. You will leave with far fewer. This is what mercy looks like. Take it. Dren stared at the screen. Every instinct in his body told him to fight, to die with honor, to refuse surrender to a species he had once called small and soft. But his ship was broken, his fleet was gone, and the human's voice carried no anger, no triumph, no cruelty, just a simple offer. Leave, live, do not come back. Dren ordered the retreat. As the last Kelhari ships disappeared from the system, Juno watched from a screen on Aethys Prime. High Speaker Vorik stood beside him, his ancient face pale. Your people could rule this galaxy, Vorik said quietly. Juno shook his head. That is the last thing we want. Vorik looked at him for a long time, searching for the lie. 6 months after the war, the galaxy looked like a different place. Not because borders had changed or empires had fallen in fire. It looked different because something had shifted in the way species thought about power, and about the small blue planet that had refused to use its power the way everyone expected. The Kelhari Dominion broke apart from the inside. It did not take an invasion or a siege. It took embarrassment. Dren had promised the coalition a quick victory, and delivered the worst military defeat in Kelhari history. His generals, the same ones who had cheered his war speeches, turned on him within weeks. They blamed him for the arrogance, the miscalculation, the shame of losing 5,000 ships to a species that the Kelhari had once called poets and doctors. Dren was removed from power, not killed, which was unusual for Kelhari politics. Stripped of title and sent to live in a small dwelling on a cold moon, alone with his thoughts and his fury and his silence. In the chaos that followed, a new leadership council formed on the Kelhari homeworld. It was made up of younger officers, diplomats, and thinkers who had spent years watching Dren's aggression lead to ruin. Among them was Tobin, the young officer who had refused to fire on a medical ship, the one who had stunned his own commander and surrendered to the humans. Some Kelhari called him a traitor. Others called him the only honest person in the fleet. Either way, he had a seat at the table now, and the first thing he did with it was reach out to Earth for peace talks. The talks were held on neutral ground, a small station in unclaimed space. Bake Juno represented Earth. Tobin represented the new Kelhari Council. They sat across a table in a plain room, with no decoration and no audience. Just 2 people trying to build something from the wreckage. I must ask, Tobin said, leaning forward. You won, completely. You could have destroyed our homeworld. You could have taken our systems, our resources, everything. Why did you not? Juno was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands on the table, then back at the Kelhari. Because that is not who we are. We built our weapons to protect our home, not to take someone else's. Tobin studied him. My people do not understand that. In our culture, strength is used. If you have power and do not use it, you are considered a fool. In our culture, Juno said, the strongest person in the room is the one who does not need to prove it. The peace treaty was signed 3 days later. It was simple, direct, and fair. No territorial demands, no reparations, no humiliation. Earth asked for one thing only, that the Kalahari never enter the Sol system with military forces again. Tobin agreed without hesitation. But Earth did not stop at peace. That was the part that confused the galaxy most of all. Within weeks of the treaty, human ships began appearing in systems across the galactic community. Not warships, medical transports, engineering vessels, agricultural teams. Shin Hana's research division, the same people who had built the gravity well projector and the ghost ship swarms, released dozens of non-military technologies to the public. Water purification systems that could make poisoned oceans drinkable. Disease treatments based on human medical research that had been quietly advancing for decades. Energy systems that were cleaner and more efficient than anything on the galactic market. They gave it all away, free, no conditions, no trade demands, no strings. The Boran Collective, which had publicly demanded Earth be investigated as a threat just months earlier, was the first to accept human medical teams. A plague had been spreading through their outer colonies for years. Human doctors arrived with treatments that stopped the plague in weeks. The Boran ambassador wept during a council session and called the humans the most confusing species he had ever encountered. On Aethys Prime, the reformed Galactic Council prepared to elect a new High Speaker. Vorik had stepped down, saying he was too old and too tired for the new world that was forming. The obvious choice, the one every delegate whispered about, was Juno, the human who had revealed Earth's strength without ever raising his voice. The diplomat who had outmaneuvered the entire galaxy from the lowest seat in the chamber. When the nomination came, Juno stood at the podium and declined. "The galaxy does not need a human leading it," he said. "If we take that chair, every species will wonder whether we are leading or ruling. And I do not blame them for wondering. It takes more time than war." He paused, then turned to Sula, the Moran observer who had watched everything with those quiet, knowing eyes. "I nominate Sula of the Moran." She was wise enough to watch before speaking. She understood what we were before anyone else did. And she will lead this council, not with strength, but with understanding. That is what this galaxy needs right now. Sula was elected unanimously. Even the Kalahari delegation voted for her. On Earth, Admiral Kang Doha retired. He did it quietly, with no ceremony and no speeches. He simply filed his paperwork, packed a small bag, and went home to a house on the coast of Busan. The house was old, built by his grandfather, with windows that faced the sea. He spent his first morning as a civilian, sitting on the porch, drinking tea, and watching the waves. Nari visited him a week later. She had been promoted to admiral in his place, a position she accepted with the same sharp, steady focus she brought to everything. She sat beside him on the porch, and for a long time they said nothing. Just two soldiers watching the ocean. "Do you think they will ever come for us again?" Nari asked. Doha lifted his cup and took a slow sip. "Probably. The universe is large, and there are always those who think that what belongs to others should belong to them. And we will be ready. We will always be ready. That is our burden and our gift." He looked at her. "But I would rather spend my remaining days hoping they will not." Nari nodded. She understood. She left that afternoon to begin her first act as admiral, a new initiative that she called the Open Shield Program. Joint training with willing alien species. Not to build a human-led military alliance, not to create an empire, but to teach other species how to defend themselves, how to build their own hidden strengths, how to protect their own homes. No one should have to hide what they are to feel safe, Nari told her officers on the first day. "We hid for 40 years. It worked. But it should not be necessary. Not for us, not for anyone." Sula, in her first address as High Speaker, stood before the Reformed Council and spoke about what humanity had taught the galaxy. They were underestimated because they were kind. They were dismissed because they were patient, and when they were pushed, they showed a strength that none of us imagined. Let this be the lesson we carry forward. Power without wisdom is just destruction. But wisdom backed by strength, that is peace. Tobin visited Earth. He had asked permission through diplomatic channels, and the humans had said yes without hesitation. He arrived in Seoul on a spring morning, stepping out of a shuttle into sunlight and noise, and the smell of food cooking on street corners. He walked for hours. Nobody recognized him. Nobody ran from him. He was just a tall, strange-looking visitor in a city full of people living their ordinary lives. He watched humans argue about parking spaces. He watched children chase each other through a park. He watched an old woman sell rice cakes from a cart and scold a customer for not saying thank you. He watched a young couple sit on a bench, holding hands, laughing about something only they understood. These are the people we tried to conquer, he thought. These small, soft, short-lived creatures who build weapons that can crush fleets and then go home and argue about parking. He shook his head, and for the first time in his life, he laughed. Not the grinding Kalahari sound of dominance. A real laugh. Something warm and surprised and almost human. Deep inside an unmarked asteroid base, far from any trade route or patrol path, Shin Hana worked alone. The base was silent, except for the hum of equipment and the soft tap of her fingers on the console. Around her, schematics floated in holographic light. New designs, new systems, new defenses. She was not building because war was coming. She was building because the universe was vast, and the Kalahari were not the only danger in it. There were old signals from deep space that no one had decoded. There were regions of the galaxy that no species had explored and returned from. There were questions without answers, and Hana had spent her entire life preparing for questions without answers. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph. Her daughter, Yuna, 7 years old, smiling with a missing front tooth, holding a drawing of a spaceship. Hana pinned the photo to the edge of her console, next to a dozen other photos she had collected over the years. Her team, the people she worked to protect. She looked at the photo for a long moment, then turned back to her work. "I will keep you safe," she whispered. "All of you." Outside the asteroid base, the stars burned in silence. Earth, a tiny blue dot in a vast and indifferent universe, continued to spin. Its people continued to live, to argue, to love, to build, and to prepare. They had never asked to be feared. They had never wanted to be a weapon. They had only ever asked to be left alone, to live their short and bright and stubborn lives in peace. The galaxy had learned, too late, that those two things were the same.